So you think it's good having the Brooklyn Tabernacle Choir with us. Last night, NSYNC and Sonny and Cher were here. Some of you don't believe me. Should have been here. Didn't know some of these people had it in them. So last week, I made the statement that it's so hard for people to look in the mirror and see that they have a problem. Why is that? That's what we're going to talk about today. So here's what you need to understand before you as a person, or we as a church, or a culture can ever experience revival, there has to be humility. And let me sort of repeat that to bring that home. Before you can ever experience a movement of God in your life, you have to first, before anything else, you have to first humble yourself before Him. So what is humility? Humility is not weakness, it's not shyness, it's not a lack of confidence. It's not, I can never do that, I'd never be able to do that. It's not putting yourself down. Humility, more than a character trait, is someone who's had a glimpse of God. Because when somebody gets a glimpse of God, that's when they totally reevaluate who they are. And when somebody gets a glimpse of God, it pushes all pride out of their life. So right here, let's go with this. Oops. Were you at the beginning? Okay. We'll get to, anyway, there's only one other thing here at the beginning. Humility is understanding who you are in light of who God is. Humility is understanding who you are in light of who God is. Okay? It's Isaiah. In Isaiah 6, he has a vision. There's the Lord, lofty and exalted. The train of his robe is filling the temple. There's smoke everywhere. Angels are going back, singing, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of armies. The whole earth is filled with his glory." And Isaiah sees that. What does he do? "What's up, God?" No. He goes, "Oh, no. No, uh-oh." He gets a glimpse of God. He's overpowered by what he sees in his whole life. It's John in Revelation. He gets that vision of Jesus. His hair is white like wool. His eyes are flaming fire. He has a sword coming out of his mouth. His feet are like bronze. And what does John do? He falls over like a dead man. Because when you get a glimpse of God, you begin to reevaluate who you are. And all of a sudden, you don't see yourself entitled to anything. You see yourself as somebody who owes, and you're not sure you can ever pay. So if humility is seeing God, pride is seeing you. And there's two extremes to pride. And a lot of people don't realize this. You have one extreme of pride over here. It's that arrogance. Look at me. Am I something or what? But there's another extreme of pride. It's over here. It's, oh, I can't do anything. I'll never amount to anything. Woe is me. Poor is me. Nobody likes me. And you think that attitude is humility. It's not. That's pride. Because what's the end of all those statements? It's me, me, me. Pride, on the one hand, is saying that you have no weakness at all because you're so strong. Pride, and on the other hand, is that you think you're so weak, God can't do anything with you. It's an indictment against Him. You don't have the strength and ability to do anything with you. But at the end of both those views, it's still me. You're still focusing on yourself. And that's just where a lot of people are at. So pride, it isn't I'm proud of my son. I'm proud of my nephew. I'm proud of my gardening. I'm proud of my photography. Proud is that yucky thing inside of you and me that says this. Well, that's right. I was going to read this. That wasn't up there. It's why I have things up there so I can try and stay on track, and because sometimes I don't. This caused C.S. Lewis to say, unchastity, anger, greed, drunkenness are mere flea bites in comparison to pride, because pride leads to every other vice. Aesop's fable said, pride is on the axle of the chariot, saying, what dust I doth raise. Remember back in high school, guys, where you decided she's not the girl for you. And so you have your speech all planned out. This is what you're going to say. And you haven't had a chance to give her your speech yet, and then you hear your best friend has asked her out, and she said yes. Now you're willing to fight to get her back. Why? Because you love her? No. Your pride just doesn't want to allow you to lose. When an hour before it was, you know how it's like when you're a guy like me. Pride puffs up. Here, I have a good illustration for you. This is what pride does. It puffs you up. We're told to humble ourselves, though, right? We're told to humble ourselves, but we'll puff ourselves up and keep puffing ourselves up, and that's what pride does. It doesn't make you bigger. It diminishes you. It ruins you. Pride diminishes your ability to celebrate other people's success. Pride diminishes your ability to admit what you need to admit. It diminishes your ability to apologize when you need to apologize. But pride not only keeps you from saying what needs to be said, pride keeps you from hearing what needs to be heard. Because there are people that are trying to tell you some things, but your pride won't hear it. It's like their words are bouncing off of you because of your pride. Pride will keep you from learning new things because you want to give the impression you already know everything. It will ruin you. It will destroy your finances, your marriage, your relationships. Pride will push others away, will push God away because there's no room for anybody else in your life but you. So, that very thing that fueled your rebellion against God, that very thing that caused you to put your hands up and say, no, God, I'm not going to be a Christ follower, I'm not committing my life to follow you, is the very same thing that will keep revival from ever coming close to your life, and that's pride. Here's what we read in Proverbs. When pride comes, then comes dishonor. Everyone with a proud heart is detestable to the Lord. Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. The lamp that guides the wicked, haughty eyes, and an arrogant heart is sin. A man's pride will bring him low. But it's much worse than all that. Here's what we read in 1 Peter 5. In the same way, you who are younger, be subject to your elders. All of you clothe yourselves with humility toward one another, because God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble. He resists the proud or opposes the proud. That's a military word. Means he lines up in a military formation against the proud. The metaphor is this. Whenever you want to be a person fills your life with you and walks in pride, you're inviting God's judgment in your life. It's going to happen. He's going to be working against you. Why would you want to have anything in your life that pushes people away and not only pushes God away, but causes God to work against you? But that's what pride does. The next verse in Peter. Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, so that he may exalt you at your proper time. Humble yourselves. That means you can do it at any time. You can choose to humble yourself. Now, let me put this in a different way that may help you understand it better. Whenever you have an opportunity to get rid of pride, take it. That's what he's saying. I'm going to go ahead and admit I'm going to go ahead and go to them and admit that. Take that pride. I'm going to apologize. Take that pride. I'm going to tell them I have an addiction. Take that pride. I'm going to go this whole next week and I'm not going to talk about myself or mention myself. Not going to do it at all. Take that pride. And some of you need to take that challenge up. That you're going to decide now this whole next week, whenever you're in a conversation, you're not going to say in the conversation, well, let me tell you about what happened to me. You're just going to leave that out. You're going to be tempted when they tell their little story. You're going to say, well, let me tell you what happened to me. And you go, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to ask them. I'm going to put the attention back on him. Whenever you have an opportunity to get rid of pride, do it. St. Francis of Assisi, he had an unusual way of dealing with pride in his life. He wrote in his memoirs how every time somebody would praise him, he would go find one of his fellow monks to tell and say, could you please tell me all my faults? And somebody said, yeah, the reason he had to go find a fellow monk is because he wasn't married. But anyway. It's not your spouse's job to humble you. It's your job to do that. This picture. Go up. Anybody know who that is? Besides a basketball player? Who? Yes. Rick Barry, NBA Hall of Fame basketball player. The guy had, in his time of his career, he had a 9% free throw average, which at that time was the best in history. He led the NBA in free throw shooting for several years. And the reason that's important is how he shot free throws. Granny style. People made fun of him, but he said, hey, it's the best way to do it. And in 2008, Discover Magazine, we can move on to that. Discover Magazine hired a physics professor to figure out what's the best way to shoot free throws. And they came back and said, Rick Barry had it right with the angle and the loft of the ball and the way the ball just kind of gently hits the basket. It has a better chance of rolling in. It's by far the best way to do it. Wilt Chamberlain, heard of him? What was he famous for? What was his best accomplishment? 100 points, yes. He was a terrible free throw shooter. Almost as bad, maybe right along the par of Shaq. I mean, he just couldn't shoot free throws. But that night, he scored 100 points in the game. He made 28 out of 32 free throws. You know how he did it? He shot him granny style. But he quit shortly after that, doing that. Why? Because he said it made him look silly. He's worried about what other people think. Worried about how it made him look. Never mind, it helped him score more points. Never mind, it helped his team out. He was more concerned with how it made him look. That's what we have to be aware of, that we don't get more concerned about how we look than about God working in our lives. But pride will keep that from happening. Here's what we read about Moses. When Pharaoh heard about this is when Moses killed the Egyptian. He tried to kill Moses. But Moses fled from Pharaoh and went to live in the land of Midian and sat down by a well. Now the priests of Midian had 7 daughters. They came to draw water, filled the troughs with water their father's flock. Then some shepherds arrived and drove them away. But Moses came to their rescue and watered their flock. When they returned to their father, Reuel, he asked, why have you come back so quickly today? They answered, an Egyptian rescued us from the shepherds. He even drew water for us and watered the flock. So where is he? He asked his daughters. Why then did you leave the man behind, invite him to eat dinner? Moses agreed to stay with the man, and he gave his daughter Zipporah to Moses in marriage. She gave birth to a son who he named Gershom, for he said, I have been a resident alien in a foreign land. So Moses thought, when he killed the Egyptian, that his days of being a deliverer of Israel were over, when really his training to be a deliverer for Israel had just begun. He spent 40 years in the wilderness. And the one thing he learned that helped him more than anything else was humility. He learns it right off the bat. Moses starts doing what he was told all his life growing up he was too good to do, and that's be a shepherd, hang out with sheep. If you remember in Genesis, it said that the Egyptians despised shepherds. That's why Jacob and his whole clan had to move out of town a little ways, because they despised shepherds. And now Moses begins doing the thing that he was told his whole life he was too good to do. He's learning humility. Next thing he dared to learn humility, he becomes a father. Charlie Shedd used to go around the country. He's a Christian speaker and author. He'd go around the country, and he was married, but before he had kids, he gave this talk. It was entitled 10 Commandments for Raising Perfect Children. Then he had a child. And he changed the title of his talk to 10 Hints for Parents. Then he had another child. He changed the title again to, what was it, Feeble Strategies for Fellow Strugglers. Then he had a third child. He quit giving the talk altogether. Because babies and sheep, they don't care that you're a prince. And then Moses, what else? He learned what it meant to be a foreigner in a foreign land. He could now identify with the Israelites. He named his first child Gershon, meaning I'm a foreigner. He knew what it meant to be a foreigner and to be oppressed. And it was because Moses' humility that he was able to do, I believe, the greatest act in his whole life. After the whole golden calf thing, he tells God, God, if you don't forgive them, erase my name from your book. And God has said, look, I'm going to wipe them out and I'm going to make a nation out of you, Moses. But Moses is saying what? No, I'm not entitled. I'm not somebody. It's not what I get, it's what I owe. And what I owe your people, like Paul, who said, I owe Greeks and barbarians. I owe them all. It wasn't about him anymore. In fact, the Bible says about him, of all the people on the earth, no one was meeker than Moses. He learned humility. But we're afraid of it. We fear it. We run away from it because we're afraid of it might cost us being recognized, or it might cause us to be trampled on, or something like that. Let me ask you this. How many of you know the show Shark Tanks? Anybody watch that occasionally? Okay, you have these people that come in with their ideas. They're entrepreneurs or they're inventors or something like that, and they have these ideas, and they pitch them to these pretentious rich people who either shoot it down or they invest in it. So I heard about this idea. I think it'd be great. And some of you can, if you want to try this out, you may invest in it and get rich. I don't know. But to have this soundtrack that you attach to your treadmill. And so you got this, and you can program with these different sounds, and you have the speakers behind you, and you can program, let's say, I don't know, zombie apocalypse. And so you're going along your treadmill, then you hear these sounds of these zombies getting closer and closer and closer and wanting to eat your brains. So we know how music can motivate us, and things that can motivate, and it motivates you faster, faster. Or one soundtrack might be Vicious Lions. You're going along a treadmill and you start to slow down and you hear these lions behind you getting closer and closer, so you run faster and faster. Or one might be Angry Housewife, blah, blah, blah. I'm already sleeping in the shed tonight, so it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what I say at this point, does it? And so that's how we handle humility a lot of times. We're afraid of it. We're afraid that it might cost us, how it might make us look, how we might not get credit, how other people, they will trample down on us if we act humble. I don't want anybody to do that to me. And we feel entitled, when in fact, if we only realize that humility, that's where the life is. That's where the joy is. That's where you see God come into your life and begin to do some things in your life. It's not something to be afraid of. It's something we need to embrace. and get rid of pride any opportunity that we have. Let me give you some benefits of humility. Number one, humility reduces stress. You don't have to have all the answers. It's a great thing for pastors when they finally discover humility, because they realize that the world and the church doesn't depend upon them. They can let God be God. And pride can be a big problem for pastors, because it's easy to think that, we're sort of the center of everything. And it's easy for us to take ourselves too seriously and not take God seriously enough. And so for pastors, the temptation is to try and make everybody think that you're spiritual, that you have all the answers, that you have all this knowledge. When in fact, the best thing you can do is learn to depend upon God. And when you come to depend upon God and realize it's all from Him, then your stress level goes down and your joy goes up. And it's the same for you. When you become humble, it can reduce the stress in your life. That everything doesn't depend upon you. The second thing, humility improves relationships. Nobody likes being around self-centered, selfish, arrogant people. But people do like being around humble people. And humble people are interested in others. And when you're interested in others, you become interesting to others. And humble people, it's hard to offend them at all. They're immune from insults because they're more concerned about the approval of God than they are about the approval of other people. But it gets better than that. Humility releases God's power in your life. This is going back to what we read a while ago. The last part of the verse, because God resists the proud, but He does what? He gives grace to the humble. You see God's power come and work in your life. How many of you remember Bozo the Clown? Okay. For those of you who don't know, it was a TV show, and Bozo the Clown, he has audience. There were kids out there. And in every show, he would he'd just pick a kid up from the audience and bring him up, and there's a little easel there, and he'd give him a marker, and the little kid would scribble a picture of something. And, we're talking 4 or 5-year-old kid maybe. Or in case of me, it could have been a 20-year-old kid, but it didn't look very, just scribbling on there. And then he would come along behind him and draw and make of that little scribble, make a good-looking picture. And that's what God's grace does. God's grace comes into our life, takes our epic fail, takes the things that we try and we're not very good at, and His power gets instilled in that, and He makes something of it. But whenever you're full of pride, you're stopping that whole process. But here's the best reason at all that we should be humble, is that we have a humble God. Here's what we read in Matthew. Come to me, all of you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take up my yoke and learn from me, because I am lowly and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. See, your pride and God's humility are completely incompatible. Here's what we read in Philippians. Do nothing out of selfish ambition, read pride or conceit, but in humility consider others as more important than yourselves. Everyone should look out not only for his own interest, but also for the interest of others. Adopt this same attitude as that of Christ Jesus. In other words, think this way. How did Jesus think? He existed in the form of God, did not consider equality with God as something to be exploited. Instead, He emptied Himself by assuming the form of a servant, taking on the likeness of humanity. And when He had come as a man, He humbled Himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even to death on the cross. For this reason, God highly exalted Him and gave Him the name that is above every name. So He says, you need to think like this. You need to think how Jesus thought. How did He think? When He came to earth, He didn't pack, He unpacked. He left His throne. He left His cross. He left His glory. He left all that in heaven and came to be born a baby, about this big. But He humbled Himself even further to the point of death, even to death on a cross. And all he's asking you to do is apologize to somebody. All he's asking you to do is not think about yourself so much. And what did God do? He exalted him. He lifted him up. So what we need to understand is that the road to greatness is humility. When you come to depend upon God, and instead of being entitled, you feel like you owe others, that's when God comes and does the work in your life. And that's what we need to happen. That's what we need to see and experience. One more thing. To walk in humility means you'll be fine with not being noticed. This is hard for people to do because every bit of social media is teaching us to exalt ourselves. Post something so other people will know how important you are. Get their approval judged by how many likes you get. And the more likes we get, the more that we like it. When really, to walk in humility is to live so that God looks good, not that you look good. It's John the Baptist. Remember when his disciples came to him and said, John, we got this urgent problem. You know, I know that we as your disciples are here, but there's other your disciples and other people. They're going after Jesus. They're following him and not you. And John goes, that's great. It's what I always wanted. I never wanted it to be about me. I always wanted it to be about Jesus. If you want to live your life making it about you, you will never be happy because people and circumstances will never focus on you as much as you want them to. But if you'll make your life about Jesus, you will always be happy because there's no circumstances, there's no person that can stop you from making life about him. So, pride has the potential to kill everything good in you, to push other people away, to push God away, and to keep you from revival. And what makes it so dangerous is that we're so unconscious of it within ourselves. Nobody in here has a sticky note on the mirror that says, remember to be humble today. Remember to teach your kids to be humble. In fact, there's a lot of you in here that's going right now, boy, I wish somebody else would listen to that message. Certainly wasn't for me today. Do you remember when Jesus tells about when the Pharisee and the tax collector go into the temple and they're praying, and the Pharisee is going, God, thank you that I'm not like that tax collector. I tithe. I'm just a great guy in that. And what do we tend to do? We tend to say, God, I thank you that I'm not like the guy who said I'm not like the guy. Do you realize when you say that you're glad you're not like the guy that says I'm not like the guy, that makes you the guy? But we'll come in here and listen and go, no, this really is not for me. So in 1857, Jeremiah Lanphier decides he's going to have a weekly prayer meeting. He's going to start in the upper room at Dutch Reformed Church in New York. The first week, 6 people show up. The second week, 14 people show up. The third week, 23 people show up. And then pretty soon, the whole place is filled. And they go from not meeting once a week, they go to meeting every day. And pretty soon, every church, every meeting hall in New York City is filled with people praying at the noon hour. They even send a reporter out, and they're going out to try and make it as many prayer meetings as they can. And one of them comes back and says, I made it to 10, and I counted over 6,100 people in those 10 prayer meetings. They begin baptizing people, cutting holes in ice to baptize people. At one point, roughly 10,000 people a week were making commitments to follow after Christ. Chicago said that within a year, they had, the best they could figure, about 1 million people become Christ followers. Here's some of the headlines in newspapers. New Haven, Connecticut. City's biggest church packed twice daily for prayer. Another one in Connecticut. Revival sweeps Yale. Albany, New York. State legislators get down on their knees. Bethel, Connecticut. Businesses shut down for an hour each day. Schenectady, New York, ice on the Mohawk broken for baptisms. Washington, D.C., 5 prayer meetings go around the clock. Bill talked about a revival happening somewhere else during his prayer time today. You want that? It begins with humility. And that means whenever you have a chance to get rid of pride, you take it. You take it. I don't know, and nobody knows, exactly what a movement of God would look like in their lives and in people's lives. But I just know this. They all begin with that. With people humbling themselves before God. Are you ready to do that? Maybe today is thinking, I'm not going to care what other people think. Man, I want to come before God and just bring myself before Him. I want to know what it is to walk in dependence of Him, where I don't feel like I'm entitled. Instead, I feel like I owe. Like Paul, who says, I owe. Greeks, barbarians, he felt in debt to them. It's Moses. When God makes him the offer, I'll just make a people out of you, Moses. No, I'm not entitled, God. I've learned that. I owe these people. And maybe you need to come to that point this morning. Maybe some of you've never given your life to Christ. And you're holding back. And it's more than likely pride in some form or fashion that's holding you back. If you would only learn to let go of that, and that doesn't puff you up, it diminishes you. It ruins your life. There may be somebody you need to apologize to, or something you need to admit, or something that's going on, and that pride is keeping that from happening. Don't let that go on. Don't let that happen. We serve a humble God. Humble himself to come and be born a little baby. Humble himself to die, and not just any death, to death on a cross. Full of shame and pain. And your pride and God's humility are completely incompatible. It doesn't happen. But when you humble yourself, that's when you see God come into your life. And that's when He does what only He can do. He can take your biggest mess ups, take your biggest ruin of your life, and come and make it something. But it all begins with that step. Are you ready to take that step? And I ask our guys to come on down, to come forward. And we're going to sing a song of invitation. And if God is speaking to you this morning, to make a decision. Just don't let your pride stand in the way. The best thing you can do is whenever you have an opportunity this week, today, get rid of it. Get rid of it. Let's stand together. Just sing.